I've been using Samsung's brand new flagship, the Galaxy S23 Ultra, for 1 week now. My thoughts have crystallized, and it's time to deliver my full review. Now, I know when this thing was first announced, or even during the early days when the rumors were leaking, a lot of people were looking at this phone and thinking, this is just not a substantial upgrade over what we just had with the S22 Ultra. And I know a lot of reviews are going to approach it from that angle. Is this a big enough upgrade from the S22 Ultra to the S23 Ultra? Now, that is not the angle I'm going to be covering this thing from. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First off, I have not owned an S-series Samsung phone since the Galaxy S3, so I have no frame of reference to review it in that regard from. I'm going to be reviewing this thing as its own device, as a standalone individual device, and also because if you own an S22 Ultra, this isn't for you. You already have a flagship that's only a year old. It doesn't ever really make sense to go from top-end flagship to top-end flagship in 1 year's time, unless, of course, you're just a big tech enthusiast and you want to do that. But that's not who this phone is targeting. It's targeting people who are due an upgrade and want to go to the next, latest, greatest thing. So again, that's the angle we're covering this thing from. So let's take a moment and talk about this thing in terms of hardware. What do we have here? What are you getting for your $1,200? Well, you are getting a 6.8-inch 1440p screen that does run at 120 hertz. You are getting a device that is relatively heavy, but not anything crazy, at 234 grams. This is IP68 dust and water resistant. It also uses Corning Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which is going to aid this thing in terms of shatter protection if you drop it and its aluminum frame. Of course, it is running the latest, greatest Qualcomm chip, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is going to provide you with some really outstanding performance and some really great efficiency to help aid battery life. You also do have 8 or 12 gigabytes of RAM, depending on the model that you get. You do also have up to 12 gigs of RAM and a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. If we flip this thing over, first off, I think that this blue color is really, really nice, if not a little bit light. In some angles, it almost looks kind of like lilac, almost a purple color, depending on the light that is around. But I do really like the way that this thing looks overall. You can see these very large cameras back here on the back, and what you have in terms of these cameras is a 200 megapixel primary. Yes, 200 megapixel, although it is typically going to be pixel binning down to like something around 12 megapixels. There is a 10 megapixel 3x optical, and then there is an additional 10 megapixel 10x optical, which provides you with a really incredible camera to use in terms of just zooming way in further than almost any other phone on the planet. And then there is an additional 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, which also does a pretty good job. And then there's a 12 megapixel selfie shooter there on the inside. We also have use of the S Pen, which lives in its own little silo at the bottom. So if you're someone that uses the S Pen for taking notes or drawing, you want to use that stylus, this is a great phone for that. Okay, so now that we have a lot of that technical stuff out of the way, the first thing about this device that immediately stood out to me, I mean, beyond just the build quality, that it feels really, really nice in the hand, is the overall performance. Okay, this Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is an incredibly performant processor. And when you're using this thing, you're going to notice it. In fact, really what you're not going to notice is any slowdown, any drop in frame rate of the UI, any performance dips at all. In the time I've used this thing, I have literally never seen this thing lag one time, okay? And maybe there's been some little imperceivable lag that I just didn't pick up on, hence the word imperceivable there, but it's going to be incredibly minor. This thing absolutely flies. It is so well either optimized, or maybe this processor is just so incredibly powerful. I don't know, maybe it's a combination of both. But this thing absolutely flies. Like I said, you're just going to be blown away by how smooth this thing is and how good the performance is. You may have seen in a prior video where I use an application called 3D Mark to benchmark this device against the Fold 4 and the Pixel 7 Pro in terms of gaming performance. And this does have ramifications in real everyday use, even if it's not maybe the most informative thing. It does kind of give you an idea of the raw power of this thing, where this device absolutely trounced either of these other two flagships, putting up scores the other two just could not even get close to. But a lot of the time, when you have a phone that's incredibly fast, what you might lose a little bit of is battery life. But that's not really been the case on this device at all. Battery life has been quite solid. Now look, I've seen people, friends of mine on Twitter, that are saying they're getting 8, 9, 10 hours of screen on time. Crazy numbers. I'm not quite getting that. I'm getting like 6 or 7 hours of screen on time. But that was also the case with the Z Fold, where I've seen people reporting 6, 7 hours of screen on time. I tend to get closer to like 5-ish. So for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm just killing phones, Samsung phones in particular, faster than some other people. But at any rate, 7 hours of screen on time, and it says it would last about a full 24 hours for me with really heavy use, is more than good enough. That puts it on top of all the phones in my house, all the phones that I have available to me. My Pixel 7 Pro, my Fold, my Duo, all the phones in this house. This has the best battery life of any of them, and it's by far the top performer as well. That is very, very impressive. One of the other things, though, that immediately jumped out to me, though, is this thing's screen. Like I said, 6.8 inches, 1440p, 500 pixels per inch. It is quite pixel dense, but man, is this thing beautiful. It is incredibly bright as well, hitting 1750 nits of peak brightness. Now, granted, that's not sustainable, right? Typically, it's going to peak around 1200, but you step outside in some bright light, this thing is going to get very, very bright, and honestly, it blows the other screens in my house out of the water. I also do want to point out that the screens don't curve quite as much as they used to. Now, granted, it does curve a bit, and like I said, I did not use the S22 Ultra to have a really one-to-one comparison here, but the amount that these screens curve don't really bother me very much at all. It's almost totally flat on the side, so I wasn't really getting any accidental presses on this thing at all, and that is another good thing. Now, while we're talking about this screen, it might be a good moment to mention the speakers on this thing, which I am quite impressed with. Now, I do want to mention that you can go into sound quality and effects, enable Dolby Atmos, and even use a customized equalizer to get even better sound out of this thing. But even out of the box, the audio quality is really quite superb, nearly on the level of my Z Fold 4, which is going to be a much larger device, and usually that does mean better speakers, more room for that sound. Now, I did mention earlier that we have access to the S Pen, which is a really nice feature to have. You can see all of these lovely things that you can do with it, but unfortunately, I just don't use this thing at all, okay? So I'm not really going to be able to speak much about this pen or what I'm going to be doing with it because, to be honest with you, I don't do anything with it at all. Every once in a great while, I might use it to quickly snip a bit of a screen and scribble something onto it. But my handwriting is so bad. I have such bad fine motor skills for this sort of thing that this pen is pretty much useless to me. But look, it's there, and it's an additional feature that very few phones, no other phone of this caliber have something like this. You're not going to get this on an iPhone. You're not going to get this on a Pixel. This is pretty much the only main flagship device where if you want something like this, this is where you're going to get it. And no, I'm not throwing shade at the Z Fold. I consider it to be a different sort of thing. So even though the cameras are a huge part of the appeal of this device, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them in this video review. And that's because I've already made 32 and a half videos covering this thing's camera, comparing it to other devices. So you're probably already in a playlist. You can find those videos on my channel very, very easily. But I will quickly show you a couple of samples and call out the things that I've noticed the most. So look, guys, the primary sensor on this thing, it takes very, very nice photos that are comparable to any device on the market. It does a very good job, whether you're using standard or portrait mode. Low light is performing quite well, maybe not up to the hype that they were showing, but still very, very solid work there. The ultra wide is nice and crisp, clear, colorful, very, very good. But man, oh man, is that zoom impressive. You can take something that is very, very far away and zoom into absolutely ridiculous levels and maintain incredible clarity, unlike almost any other phone on the market. Even something like the Pixel with its 5x optical zoom simply cannot keep up with this thing at anything over 10x zoom. But in case you were wondering about that video performance, well, honestly, guys, it is very, very good. The stabilization is greatly improved over really any phone I've used. It's even more stable than my Pixel a lot of the time. The clarity, the color, even the audio in a really big room like this where I'm not talking at my noise padding stuff on the wall. Pretty solid overall. We've even got some really nice improvements to astrophotography mode, not just to make it easier to capture the constellation you want, but to actually make that photo look better. And in some instances, it might even be better than what the Pixel is doing, where the Pixel tends to really over-brighten the very middle of the sky. This thing kept a very nice, even level of brightness. The last thing I'll say about this camera, because I know you're going to ask, the 50 megapixel and 200 megapixel mode is a cool thing to have, although it's not something you're going to want to leave turned on all the time. I've got a full video talking about that, probably linked in the description down below, but I will throw one quick sample on the screen here where you can see that the dynamic range, the exposure, the over-brightening of a lamp is a really good example of what you're going to potentially see in those modes, but not in the normal 12 megapixel mode. So to wrap this thing up, guys, you're probably thinking, wow, he hasn't said a single negative thing about this phone, and that's because I really don't have anything to complain about. The battery life is good, the performance is good, the cameras are good, the screens are good. Screens? Maybe that's the problem. There's only one screen, and it's not a folding screen or a dual screen. Maybe that's my only complaint. The screen is good, the speakers are good. This is one of the most complete devices I think that you can buy, and I gotta put it right there with my Pixel 7 Pro as being my favorite slab style device. If you had to make me pick between the Pixel 7 Pro and this thing, I don't know what I would do. They're both so good. This phone has so many software features and so much customization that you can do with Good Lock and all of the other built-in Samsung stuff, things you can tweak like that equalizer for your speakers. How cool is that? And then you have to factor in the Samsung ecosystem. There is a Galaxy Watch 5 Pro on my wrist. There are Buds 2 Pros in my pocket, and they integrate together so well, so nicely. That bit of video I shot earlier showing you the video, I was watching it through my watch. That's how I triggered it, right? Like, that's all very, very cool stuff that, yes, you can do on other phones, on other OEMs, but it's very, very good on this Samsung device. Now, it is $1,200. This is not a cheap device at all. So you have to factor that into this. This is a very expensive device. And is it worth $1,200? That's going to be up to you. But if I'm me, which it just so happens that I am, and I live in a world where I can't have a Z Fold and I can't have the Surface Duo, this is going to be at the top of the list of phones I'm going to be considering just simply because of everything that it can do. Now, like I said, the Pixel 7 Pro for a few $100s cheaper is a real competitor to this thing, but it might just be worth it to get this device in particular. If you are a Samsung person, maybe you already own some of those earbuds, one of their watches, this thing makes a ton of sense. It is really very good. Now, I wish I could say thanks to Samsung for sending it to me, but in fact, I cannot. I paid for this thing out of pocket. So if you want to help support this channel and help me pay for this kind of stuff, if you want to buy one of these, use my affiliate link in the description down below. That's going to help this channel out a lot. Otherwise, just leave a like or something like that. That's going to definitely benefit me as well. Guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.